Hi there, my name is Misha Gill. I'm an estate planning attorney with Speedwell Law here in Alexandria, Virginia. My guest today is Corey Tisdale.
Hi, I'm Corey Tisdale with Tisdale Law Firm. I am a family and criminal and military law attorney in Alexandria, Virginia.
Thanks, Corey, for being with me. I reached out to you to have this conversation, and we're going to have a conversation about white privilege and the wealth disparity between Black households and white households. And I thought that this would be a good topic for me to talk about. Well, one, because it's my area of expertise. I'm an estate planning attorney, but it's also of the moment where we are having conversations about what white privilege means. And this is what I know. So that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. So thank you so much, Corey, for being with me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Good. Thanks for meeting with me today via Zoom to have this discussion. And obviously, it's a really important time in our history, and I'm really grateful to have a conversation partner about this. Obviously, it's a difficult conversation to have, but you're such a great person that I know that we're going to have a successful and good conversation. So thank you so much. You had a chance to look at that article I sent?
I did.
Pretty
Yes.
incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's what I expected. So
Yeah, it is. It's a known thing, right? Okay, so but for the viewer, I'm talking about an article I sent to Corey called "Examining the Black-White Wealth Gap," that was published by the Brookings Institution, and that it's a February 27th, 2020 article, so pretty recent. And the high level view is that the net worth of a typical white family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family as of 2016. And so obviously that's a huge disparity. And one of the things that contributes to that huge disparity is the transfer of wealth between generations. And so that's something that I'm an expert in, but not in this topic. And so, Corey, I wanted to talk to you about what that looks like, and how that is. It's such a contrast to my world and to my knowledge, and just I'm seeking to understand a little more. So my ears are open, and looking forward to learning about this. So, I mean, what were your thoughts or impressions when you read the article? Not a surprise. What else?
I mean, it's not a surprise, even though that was my first time seeing that article. I think, being an African American, growing up in a family and a community, you see those things, in your day-to-day life, and that the discrepancy when it comes to, or I guess the lack of intergenerational, wealth that exists in the community. And a part of that, I feel like maybe sometimes, people are harsh on the African American community by saying, let's say comparison. You say if you have an immigrant, families that come over here first generation, and they will maybe do very well within that next generation. And they'll say to the Black community, well, why are you not able to make that jump to bridge that gap, going from having nothing to being able to become the next lawyer, doctor, or provide economic wealth to your family and to your community. And it fails to really look at a lot of things that have, I guess, have been a part of the systematic oppression that has helped continue that lack of wealth in the community. So when you see that huge gap between white wealth and Black wealth in the United States, it's not by happenstance. My hometown, which has made the news lately, even though we both live in Virginia, but my hometown is Tulsa, Oklahoma. And Tulsa, Oklahoma, before 1921 was home of one of the most economic,
Thriving
prosperous,
Black.
Black
Communicable
community.
businessmen, the Black Wall Street, they called it, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it shows it's showing that
Well, tell
a
us what happened.
community.
Tell us what happened.
Sure, sure. I mean, it was a prosperous community that in the time of segregation, there were black banks and doctors, and lawyers and supermarkets and everything that exists in in an economy was existing there, and at that also that community was so wealthy at that time that a lot of times in comparison to white members in Tulsa, this community sometimes had more. The dollar would circulate, 30
On
days.
the other foot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um, and unfortunately, due to, we don't have to go into all the events, but it led to the white community coming in and completely destroying and the black community. I mean, they flew planes over the community, bombed, lit everything on fire. But that's not the worst part, right? I mean, that's terrible, and that's horrific, the deaths and the loss of property. But a system that said, hey, when you've lost this property, what happens if our offices get burned down, or if our houses get burned down? Insurance covers it. Insurance refused to cover the loss of property. Also in that community, when the community tried to rebuild it up after that tragic event, the city builds a highway straight through Greenwood, which was the name of the community, with no exit or off entrances. So completely, through eminent domain, it just takes it over. And now, though, I absolutely love, well, they're the opposite of where I went to school. They're the enemy. But, taking out, not looking at that, Oklahoma State University, which is a great institution, now sits in the majority of that property. So it still can't even be redeveloped really in any kind of real way for the community. So when you look at that, those types of actions, it destroys the heart and soul of the community, the belief that they can, achieve something, or when they do achieve it, they can hold on to it, because it's not just another person who is taking it away, but it's the system itself. The system says that you can't have this, and establishes rules or actions that keep them from being able to move forward. And over time, it breaks down the spirit of an individual to say, well, why should I even try? And I know that's a little bit that's diverting away from the article, but I think that's just an example.
That's the heart of what I'm trying to get at here is, what is white privilege, and what does that mean in our current moment? How are we still living with it? And clearly this is a problem that is still with us.
Yeah.
And so the other day I heard it summarized as, imagine that you're swimming in a river. White privilege would be swimming your whole life going with the current downstream.
Yeah.
And then as a black person, your experience in America would be the opposite. You would be swimming in the river going upstream. Sure, it's possible to make progress, but everything about your experience wants to pull you back. Whereas the white privilege, everything about it wants to push you forward. And, that's, what do you think? Does that sound ringing true with you? Yeah.
No, I think that's very true. I think, unfortunately, being a Black in America is every day waking up having to try to prove that your existence is worth something, right? And for those, who, those of us in the Black community who are not necessarily in our Black community, right? That we're in professions or something that causes us to step out, or not see, other members who look like us on a daily basis. It's this constant fighting of microaggressions. It's this constant fighting of trying to prove that you're supposed to be here, that you're worthy to be here. And it can be tiring. It can be very, very difficult. It's even just trying to prove that, a lot of times, if you get into a university or whatever, someone will say, oh, no, you're just an affirmative action hire or affirmative action, student, despite that you may have some of the best grades. And it's just kind of sad that, you're always having to fight to prove yourself no matter what you try to achieve in your life. I come from a place of beautiful people. Oklahoma is a wonderful state, but maybe due to the lack of diversity, due to the lack of prosperity because of certain reasons in the Black community, you see those microaggressions all day, every day. Because even people with good hearts who are not necessarily, trying to be racist by nature, there are certain stereotypes, there's certain lack of experiences in education that just cause them to think a certain way or just question certain things about your existence in
Or express themselves a certain way.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Building
and
into the fabric of our culture in a lot of ways.
I mean, many times I've worked at firms where I was the first, um, African American or even person of color that they may have even had in that institution, right? And even down to the point where they may never have had even a secretary, you know. And when you think about it, this day and age that you don't even have someone, even a secretary, person of color, is a problem, where they think hiring a woman is like a big step. And that's sad, right? Women make up half the population, and forcing them to hire a woman is an issue. But I think when it comes to that, kind of bridging back to that wage gap, when you look at history, you've coming out of slavery, right? When you step out of slavery, just because you got free from slavery doesn't mean you know how to jump into the world and the economy, right? You don't have education, you don't have any knowledge about, the world outside of the one world you just left. So a lot of times they just ended up working at the plantation, right? Maybe for really low wages. For those, who are able to make that jump, they hit certain walls. And you see that along the way, whether it's, segregation, dealing with Jim Crow, whether it's dealing with redlining in communities. I mean, I think about, and that's not, we all think about this as happening a long time ago. But, I look at my mother's experience and generation. My mother grew up in a house where her family moved into a neighborhood that was white at some point, right? And as Black people moved into that neighborhood, whites left, right? So it's this continual, separation that continues to occur. And why does that affect wealth? Well, it affects wealth because for some reason we value houses or neighborhoods that are more populated by white people at a higher, level than we do those populated by Black people. So no matter if they kept their lawns perfect, no matter it's the same house, all of a sudden this house doesn't have the same value, doesn't increase in value at the same rate. So even when we've seen this moment in history where it was hard for Blacks to get loans and to be able to get into the housing ownership, but even when they did, that investment didn't produce the same dividends as a person, in a white neighborhood. So the house that they can pass down, the money, the wealth that's growing in that household is less. And you see that every time, even in the most prosperous Black communities. If you look in Maryland, in LA, in Atlanta, I have cousins who live in Atlanta. And I was blown away the first time I visited there to see these, like, what looks like very upper middle class to wealthy Black neighborhoods. And they're they could cost considerably less than the same house if it was in a white community, though they're absolutely gorgeous. It is the suburbs, the Starbucks, all those things that are there. But what they invest into it doesn't turn around to the same dollar. It's just a part of the problem. I live in my neighborhood that is gentrifying, and it's only the place is becoming having increased value because of the influx of the white community and the departure of minorities. And so as long as we have that psyche, how do we win? How do we share in that dream? Because the moment we move somewhere, you say it has no value. So even if now we move to the point where maybe we don't run into the same level, though I'm sure it still exists, being able to get loans and to enter into the market. Anytime we enter into that market, it's valued less. And I think that runs across several industries, whether that's in our profession, whether that's in fashion, and what the value of when the Black community is putting something forward, it's considered ghetto. But the moment it's adopted by, the white culture, then all of a sudden it's cool and interesting. And then those people, are able to value it. What does that all turn around to? It turns around to the Black person who maybe was the initiator of that or entered in that market. They don't receive the rewards for that. So there are very few industries, except for sports, and some levels of entertainment, that's not the case. And maybe it is,
Well, even there's all kinds of problems. And I mean, you still have the problem of microaggressions. Yes. And you still have the problem of, one of the interesting things about the Brookings article was the point that they made about how when a Black person achieves a level of prosperity, they are called upon at a higher rate to help provide for other members of their community, friends, neighbors, so on and so forth, who, there are just more of those people who are not of means. And so you end up giving away more of your prosperity or sharing your prosperity across more individuals. And so, I mean, you have that problem. But all of that, what you were talking about before with the housing values and, the fashion trends and how all of these things, when they are in the hands of a Black person, suddenly become more valuable and start being taken away. Yeah. I mean, that's just so frustrating, right? Yeah. And this is what you were talking about initially in our conversation, was how emotionally taxing that must be. To me, that's just emotionally exhausting. I mean, as an entrepreneur, as an owner of my own business, there are enough setbacks that I deal with on a regular basis that I can't even imagine having to think about the color of my skin and what that means for, accomplishing my business goals. I mean, that is a weight that doesn't fall on my back. That is my white privilege. Right. I think about this all the time. That's not the only way in which I've experienced white privilege in my, starting my business. I got help from my family to put, some money in so that I could then start earning. Now, it wasn't like a huge amount of money. It was a very modest amount of money in by dollar value, but it meant everything. It meant that I could get the business off the ground. And then I also had a spouse to put a roof over my head while I was starting my practice. So I didn't have to take money out of the practice in order to pay for rent, pay for food. I could reinvest the earnings from my business into the practice. Yeah. And that's a privilege, honestly. And, just right there, that, we haven't even covered the privilege of not having to worry about my race when I go to the bank to open a bank account, getting a business license, continuing to operate and solicit business from the general public. It's just all I can do at this point is acknowledge, wow, it would have been crazy if I had to think about the color of my skin in that context, in that situation. So wow, I mean, that would be frustrating.
I mean, it is frustrating. And I think it is also frustrating is when, Blacks bring this issue up. It seems like there's certain groups of people that feel like it's an attack against their privilege when all we're asking for is to share in that privilege, right? It's not saying
the opportunity.
Right. It's not saying that we don't like that, as a white person shouldn't have that privilege. It's saying the rest of us want to have that opportunity as well. And not to feel those setbacks constantly in our lives when we try and we do achieve something and we step up, to only be pushed back because of the color of our skin, not because of our mind or not because of our work ethic, but just because of a level of pigmentation, which can be very, very frustrating.
Right.
No, but yeah.
It's just a biological fact how much melanin you have in your skin. It doesn't say anything about your value as a human being. Sorry, that was just maybe too much of a weird truism. Feeling a little self-conscious now. So let's take this back to the ostensible topic today, which is the transfer of wealth between generations. are there, we've maybe talked about it a little bit, what sort of challenges do white people not face? What sort of challenges do Black people face in that transfer of wealth between generations, and what can we do to fix it? I mean, there was a suggestion referenced by the article, that talks about there's even a difference in how we tax this prosperity, because, if white people are the ones who are passing lots of wealth between generations and that's at a lower tax rate, then that's another thing that is swimming downstream. That's another way of swimming downstream. This money is just going to accumulate, wealth earning more wealth. But are there other things? I mean, sophistication and education and just community expectations. What else am I not seeing?
I mean, I think you're hitting it, right on when you start with education, right? One of the things that, hinders anyone is lack of education.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people take for granted the education they're receiving from home. So yes, you do have maybe the financial, benefit that's coming from your household, but you also have the knowledge base. You have a parent who's already been successful, or is, has had the opportunity, and to share that knowledge. And you may not even think about it because it's just come, it's been in your life every step of the way. Versus another individual who may have not had exposure to that, they may be exposed to the exact opposite, which are bad habits, right? And it's not for lack of desire, it's just from lack of exposure.
And maybe that's one of the big problems with white flight, and white people taking themselves out of the neighborhood that is, in the first place, but then also coming in and occupying the neighborhood that is gentrifying and forcing out the people that are of less means with the higher taxes and just, the temptation of cashing out.
And I think it can happen in any community, right? Whether it's a rural community, no matter what race they are, whether it's, a Black community or the other minority community, we have the system in our education system that kind of separates people, mm-hmm. right? And so the lack of exposure. I remember when I was a little kid, and I did have the privilege of growing up in a middle class home, and I was watching, I don't know if it's 2020 or Dateline. It was one of those shows when I was a little kid, and this is when the Cosby Show was currently, was on TV, and they had this Black female who lived in, at that time, the Chicago projects, the very tall Chicago projects, where they they had everyone, I don't know how many people, hundreds of thousands of people in this kind of large skyscraper buildings. And they asked her, do you believe any Black people live like the Cosbys? And she said, no. It's like, you don't even believe the Cosbys, those actors, live like the Cosbys. And she said, no. She couldn't envision that because she had never seen anything different, right? That's TV, right? All those things are TV, but every day of her life was this environment. I know that's an extreme, an example, someone who's been isolated to this kind of block of projects, but it still, I think it speaks to the fact that lack of exposure, lack of education, without that, someone can't really even dream about, achieving something different, let alone having the knowledge base in order to do so. So though education and exposure doesn't fix everything, right? Because I've had education and exposure, but there's still a lot of things that, punch you in the chest along the way. But it is the foundation, which you can start with, right? It's what helps you fight, is being able to have that education. So I think at some level, we have to rethink about, our school systems. We have a system that, upper middle class, environments, people who could probably afford private education, get private type of education in the public schools, and those individuals who are not in those environments are kind of left out. And so some of the basic information to help them succeed in their lives is just not provided along the way. And then you're saying, let's compete as an adult. Well, not only do they have skin color, they have a setback when it comes to education. They don't have the economics, coming, money coming from their families as well. It's just a lot. It's a lot of things that you have to tackle, and it's a hard question to answer because I don't think there's a one thing you can do that can fix everything. I think everyone has to play their part where they're an expert to try to help fix it. You know, so
Yeah, I mean, there are no simple solutions. So many of our endemic problems in American life are do not lend themselves to simple solutions. Those ones that do lend themselves to simple solutions have been, those solutions have been found.
yeah.
In general, I think our society prefers simple solutions. Okay, take a pill
Yeah.
versus learn how to meditate. Um, we are not a people that are patient. And so I think, one of the things that would help would just be listening and learning and empathizing. Um, because that's all we can offer. One of the things I think that is most harmful about white privilege is the privilege of not having to pay attention.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a privilege because you don't have to think about this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And if we just thought about these problems, if we all committed to thinking about these problems, not only would you see the microaggressions dissipate to a certain extent, but you would also see people lending a hand in a way and at a time that it makes a difference. But that's not a solution that most people want to hear. Simple solutions are far preferable because they're more expedient, as paths to office or whatever, paths to profit. Those are our two incentives, right? Path to power, path to profit. So how do you get in America, how do you get those incentives to align? And that's one of the key facets of our great experiment is how do we do that? And I think that the only thing that I know that the only thing that I can do is I can listen, I can learn, and I can empathize.
Well, I mean, and get your hands dirty, right? Which is, we have to get into those communities and be able to pass that knowledge on.
That's very important. How do you do that?
I mean, I think whatever one individual's expertise is share that information, right? So whether that's joining with an existing organization or creating your own organization that taps into that community that says, hey, I'm here for you to expose you to this particular knowledge that I have. It's more than just saying I know the problem exists. I'm saying that we're willing to be a part of the solution and help and impart that information. I think also, I mean, we also in our day-to-day lives have to maybe provide those opportunities for those individuals who are trying. A lot of times I think there's a lot of judgment that comes to people of color. They have to work harder to prove themselves, in the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times is being that helping hand, and not in some kind of pity kind of way, right? But in a way that says, hey, I'm here for you. I'm willing to, help. But I want to be careful not to cast this conversation in a sound, because it sounds like, hey, Black people need this kind of like a white person or someone to be their savior to help them come out of their situation, right?
Yeah.
They just want to be able to compete along with everyone else, right? And have the same opportunities as everyone else. More than capable, a group of people who have come out of slavery, who have come out of Jim Crow, who have fought, day in and day out in this country, and are still fighting, are strong. They're very strong people and very, very capable. And a lot of times what we're asking for is to have those opportunities, but also to stop putting up walls, right? I recognize that life is not fair and everyone's dealt a different, hand of cards. Some people have privilege for a lot of reasons, whether they come from a very wealthy family, whether they have certain, just connections, whatever. Everyone has different cards, and someone, yeah. So yeah, that can, there you go. That can, that can help. But what we need is not walls being placed in front of us. Kind of when I went back and we kind of gave the example of the 1921 massacre in Tulsa, those are walls, right? It's a capable community. They were able to do everything on their own, right? Establish the bank, establish everything. That knowledge, they were able to find it, create it, and make it happen. And so I think with given opportunity, it's not that they need a savior. They just need to not have someone every time that they try to achieve something, create a law, or put something in front of them to take it away. And the hard part is that it's the system that takes it away, right? People do it in the name of law. They do it and say that this is just because I passed a law to do this. And that's the hard part. That's the hard part to fight. So it's establishing an even playing ground. I think that is also where we can start as well. So I hate to kind of go off on a tangent, but I wanted to be careful to make it seem like, hey, treating it like this is we're a group of people that need this special help. No, we just we just want to play the game the same way that everyone else plays.
Don't stand in my way, dude.
Yeah, exactly. But I think
if you see someone standing in my way, maybe take them by the hand and lead them.
Exactly, lead them away. Right. And I think also a lot of times, as individuals, as allies into the community, is sometimes when we see people, as you say, standing in the way, when we see people, positions of power that are doing things that are hindering and are very hurtful, and helping perpetuate this bias and this prejudice, it's not being quiet, right? I mean, we see that right now. It's a lack of being quiet. Means a lot, and it's helpful. And a lot of times we just avoid conflict. We don't want to be that person. I'm guilty at many times of avoiding that conflict, right? Because it's just sometimes easier to let that moment pass than what it feels like to be aggressive. But I think it's time that people stand up and say, hey, no, I'll call it out. That is a very racist idea or action, and hold people accountable. And
that's not right, dude. That's not right. Yeah. Whatever it is. Well, Corey, this has been a very, enlightening conversation for me, and edifying. That's the word I was looking for. It's been a very edifying conversation. So thank you so much. Let's leave it there. Corey Tisdale, thank you so much. Misha Gill signing.